Women's World Cup 2023. I'm going to start with one of the hosts' games. I'm going to start towards the end of the map, just because I think it juxtaposes how Ireland sought to set up later versus how they were quite defensive initially. And you could see that in the recovery time between the two teams, with Australia getting it back in around 10 seconds versus Ireland 30 or so. And that was partially due to just this 2-4 shape that Australia built in versus what was initially a 5-2-3 by Ireland. But later in the game, they went more aggressive, so they pushed higher up the pitch, engaging Australia higher, and then also they pushed McCabe higher on this left-hand side. What also made this really uncomfortable for Australia were two things. So the substitutions of Ireland up the pitch, but then also the pattern of play that Australia and Ireland had fallen into, where the movements of the fullbacks and centre midfielders pushing higher up the pitch to make the forward line for Ireland's position untenable actually started to backfire, because then when Ireland did win back the ball, there was a ton of space for them to be able to run into with no centre midfielders to block and slow them down, and so the defence were forced into evasive manoeuvres. Speaking a little bit more on Australia's movement, what they were trying to do was continue that movement of the fullbacks, where the fullbacks push really high up in the wide spaces, and that forces the wide midfielders for Ireland to have to drop, creating more space for Gorey and Fowler to play between the lines, just in the blind spots of the two centre midfielders for Ireland. And if they were able to successfully force Ireland's whole defensive unit to drop, that gave an opportunity for the centre backs fireballs through the lines. Okay, so we start to see that pattern that I mentioned here. We've got the 2-4 still. We've got Ireland somewhat dropping into that 5-2-3, and the wide midfielders for Ireland trying to stay narrow. And earlier in the game, the Australian fullbacks would pull higher, and this would force those wide midfielders to peel out wide, and then that would make the two centre midfielders for Ireland have to then engage onto the two centre midfielders for Australia. But now Ireland are trying to get something from this game, so we've got more aggression from the deeper defensive players. Australia are able to get the ball down the side, but are immediately engaged. The thing that I just wanted to point out instead was Murray and Fowler, so them both pushing across, looking to try and combine in that right hand side, or whilst Cooney Cross, the other centre midfielder, essentially was playing as the CDM, and you'd have the fullback at his far side here tucking in. And so now we can jump back to the beginning of the game, and this is what I wanted to juxtapose that against, being, again, we've got that deep 2-4 shape, but the Irish players in their 5-2-3 are quick to drop off, happy to concede space and engage closer to their half, and we get to see some of that push and pull with the wide midfielder and centre midfielders looking to try and put pressure in the central space, and Australia using tactic that they used quite often during the game, actually, just playing it long into those channels, given they had willing runners in Rasso, Vine, Ford. Of course, huge loss not having Sam Kerr doing this running in behind, given just how fast she is. Okay, so moving to the 59th minute, we still have our 2-4 shape against the 5-2-3. We've had O'Sullivan just going to press against Cooney Cross here, given, as I mentioned, one of our wide midfielders is being pulled wide here by the movement of Catley, and then in between the lines we've got the movement of Fowler looking to try and get into those hot spaces and combine with the wide midfielders. And so with that little push and pull battle that we had, eventually get to see Kennedy push really high up on this left hand side and look to fire a ball out here into forward. We've got our creative players between the lines, and we've got our centre forward running here from the centre space into the vacated space in behind the Irish wide centre back and wing back. Unfortunately, that play breaks down and we get to see what essentially was Ireland's key form of attack in open play, i.e. counterattacks, transitions. Unfortunately, they don't have the quality in this instance to beat the initial defense. Ireland just generally struggled with their build-up. So for example, we've got them attempting to build up deep in a 3-2 shape, that being where they didn't just go long straight from the goalkeeper as they did on most occasions. In the 67th minute, we get to see that 3-2, and as soon as they do this, Australia immediately engage. Their pressing shape generally seemed to be a 4-1-4-1 or a 4-2-3-1, but when Ireland chose to actually try and build up deeper, they engaged really quickly, really aggressively with numbers. Yeah, and you just get to see that here with Rasso doing this lung busting run out towards the left hand side, which forces an error out of Fahy here, and from that Australia are able to counter-attack, but the shot is blocked. Okay, with that, let's have a look at Australia's corner kicks. Often in swinging, both teams basically almost always always went for in-swingers. Australia set up bunching all their players just in a line beyond the penalty spot, and then from there we're going to have runners towards the near post, center of the goal, and the far post. And yeah, while that example was in the 5th minute, we've got a similar example in the 19th minute. Again, we had all of the players bunched up just beyond the penalty spot, and then as the kick is taken, we get runners towards the near post, center, and back post. But I wanted to show this specific scenario because off it, Ireland are able to counterattack and arguably create a dream scenario where eventually the ball is played out here into McCabe, and she's the one playing the final through ball. Unfortunately, she's not able to get it inch perfect, and so the attack breaks down. But Ireland are able to get back in possession and set up into a 3-2 midfield shape. So you've got Littlejohn and O'Sullivan as your centre midfielders. Although Littlejohn essentially becomes a CDM and O'Sullivan is able to push up into a more attacking position. This was very rare because Ireland didn't really possess the ball that well. When they did, McCabe seemed to have license to float and orchestrate play a bit. And with that, let's move on to Ireland's set pieces. So in contrast to Australia's, we don't have them lining up beyond the penalty spot. Instead, we've got them trying to overload the back post here, being the blind spot of these defenders at the near post. And then they had a variety of places that they would place the ball. So you've got your near post on top of the goalkeeper and the back post. And of course, utilizing, as they typically do in women's football, congestion around the goalkeeper, force them into having to run through bodies to get to the ball. And whilst there were options on the edge of the box, it was rare that they were able to get any sort of clean shot off. Okay, so just showed that example in the 70th minute, and then you've got a similar thing again, but in the 83rd minute, we're going to have an in-swinger again, and then you've got a number of players typically positioning towards the back post in the blind spot, and they're going to look to try and run towards the near post. Other than that, I would also mention Ireland had a few long throw-ins, but they weren't particularly dangerous. Just thought I should mention them. And with that, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, consider sharing it on social media, subscribing, watching some of our other content, leaving a comment on who you are supporting in the World Cup. It goes a really long way for the channel. And with that,